It is, and I know we have worked on those type of challenges, and it is because, like as you say, the complexity that happens at an individual brand level. Look at that with say 50 brands. Um, this is again another thing. If you're looking at scale and on the IT side from delivering, I think the idea that you can have 100 websites, yes, there's you can do this and you can build some commonality in the
Yeah,
governance around that. But if you underestimate, and where I see this stuff kind of falling down, is when you underestimate the effort to manage the design layer in there, and that's really about components and having. I think we can look at if you look at the average digital experience, there are certain, I'm going to use some posh words now, archetypes of experience that make sense. Like we have the certain devices that we look at things on, things that work, design patterns that work, and you don't want to reinvent every experience from scratch. But every brand needs to express itself in a unique way, and that's primarily content, but it does have a design implication as well. Um, if you're trying to solve the problem that you've just laid out there, you need to be able to do this at scale. So what are the common processes? What's the common layer that needs to exist that does allow? I really like what you said there, which is freedom in a box. That's perfect. That's exactly what it is. Where you can go to a tree of components that will allow you to build a very competent digital experience base level, but there's no one's going to come complaining that they can't express their brand. Like the average, marketing person or a brand owner doesn't want to feel restricted. They don't want to go back to
yeah,
the traditional grumpy IT and say I need this, and no, you can't have
yeah,
that. That's unique. That will cost you a lot of money to do that. But all I want to do is move this around here, and you don't. That happens, and it still happens now. But if you design things right and you understand the scaling the platform plus the design layer work together in the right way, you don't have to have that problem at all. And you can almost break that up into an 80-20 principle. There are probably 80% of what you want to do should be in the platform to be able to deliver that. But that 20% where you want to start playing around with brands, creativity and content, expressing that stuff needs to be available to you without cost. And that is, that's I mean, we've worked on projects like that. And when it works, it works big time and it saves
tremendously well.
millions.
Yeah,
It does.
millions and millions. Yeah, it really does. And it saves reputations, doesn't it? So I think you laid it out really nicely at the top of this conversation. You talked about growth, cost, and risk. So if we just you know, broke those three things down, everyone's seeking growth. So everybody wants to be able to publish content to their sales cycle. They don't want to be have their content publishing managed to a technology cycle or an organizational cycle. It's got to be market focused. From a cost point of view, growth is completely underpinned by your ability to build things sensibly in one location and have them, I guess, kind of permeated out to all the different places that you're using them in an appropriate way. And then from a risk point of view, you absolutely want to make sure that your brand reputation is being managed and is being safeguarded by the tools. And that could be from a brand consistency point of view, it could be from a data compliance point of view, user experience, accessibility, all of these things, superbly important. And it feels like and I think you can speak to this really well, better than I can. We've seen the role of technologies like Drupal kind of almost evolve from being CMS platforms, for want of a better word, to platforms that create platforms, to platforms that build sites and build experiences. So they're experience building workflows rather than CMSs that you build and then release into the wild. Is that fair? Do you see it like that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points around that. I think the other thing that we haven't touched into yet was when we're assembling this experience. Increasingly, that's now adopting a series of AI models, really, and the idea that
Yeah,
that's typically a mix models as well, which may drive something like an AI agent on your site, or it have some component to it that requires multiple models as well. And again, within the framework we're describing here, you need to be able to make decisions about which model is appropriate to deploy which capability. And then I think going back to the point you were making there, yes, in terms of building, sorry, was it you were saying about building the platforms that using the,
Yeah, it's almost like a
yeah,
yeah. So your platform becomes a platform building platform. So it's it's I guess it's the ability to say, look, we need to deploy an experience to this market or this segment. We're going to target it, but we want all of the central governance principles to be built in from the outset. We don't want to have to replicate that from ground up. So that's got to ship from it's got to be baked in. But at the same time, we want to build something and then release it to that market, and then really set the communicators free so that they can start, creating the specific kind of communications that are going to work for that market. And that feels like, that's almost like a website building capability rather than a website capability.
I think what that touches into, and I remember what I was going to say now, which was this is where sometimes this is described as composability. I'm not overly comfortable with that idea, and I would prefer modularity. Someone would say there is a difference. We don't get into the semantics of all this, but if I think of composability as it's laid out by, say, the analyst, is really an architectural statement about interoperability between systems, so you can bring components of systems together. But it always perplexed me a bit because that's only part of the problem. Your ability for your platforms to connect to things, that obviously that's part of it, integrating those and as easily as possible. And I mean, Drupal in particular is very good at that because it's got 50,000 modules, so it's probably something that you want to do. You're going to be most of the way there. You might have to do a bit of configuration, a bit of custom, but mostly not. But then you look at when you want to manage that platform, and this is where where sort of SaaS capabilities fall down, and then the requirement for some kind of PaaS layer where there is extreme customization, which pushing a SaaS product outside of its comfort zone or become more of a headache than. And I think this is where when you have to maintain a bunch of components that are custom to things, this is where the whole life cycle of managing that is way outside the scope of composability. And that's the problem I've had with composability. It's like, as a business, want to be able to maintain that, with a structured way, with governance principles around it, repeatability. But if you're only looking at the connections between that, how do you manage the life cycle of those API gateways, for example? How do we know that you can
Yeah,
deploy with consistency and everything's not going to fall apart? Like the
yeah,
architecture within, say, the Drupal ecosystem is modular, that's designed from almost day one to be able to do that. And I think you're leaving a lot behind. If you walk away from that, you're sacrificing solving the entire problem, the life cycle of that problem. Composability sounds glamorous, but the reality of it is it's probably 25% of the problem that you need to solve. That's really my problem with composability. I like the promise of it, but I think the reality of it doesn't really deliver on what businesses require. And I think just as a final point on that, the experiences out there, that's what we're certainly seeing, is where people are trying to achieve these ideas and it's getting lost in the weeds and it's becoming an architectural nightmare for a lot of businesses that have tried to transform in that direction. So I don't know what you think about that. That's I'm sure I know you've.
yeah. I mean, I completely agree because we're not just talking about one technology anymore. It's a whole series of technologies. So you have your CMS platform, you have your personalization engine, you have your marketing automation engine. It's plugged into your CRM or your CDP. There's e-commerce in there. There's a PIM. There's all these different systems, all these different point solutions. They're all tremendously, fantastically focused on doing the best thing that they possibly can for their use case, but they've all got to be tied together, haven't they? They've all got to a working concept. They've all got to share data around in a consistent way, and then you're going to multiply that by the number of different geographical markets or different market segments that you're addressing, or business units, or however you're organized. You're going to then kind of multiply that complexity, and before you know it, you can be in a situation where if you change one part of it, then that's going to have like massive ramifications on the other part of it. I think that's kind of one of the challenges that we wrestle with, is finding architectures that are going to be robust, and not just robust from day one, but I guess resilient when change comes, because we know change is going to come. It's going to come relatively quickly, whatever from whatever direction. It could be a growth imperative, could be a cost imperative, could be a risk imperative, whatever it is.
Mm.
And then the architecture then has to be resilient, scalable, but also it's got to be flexible enough to adapt, hasn't it?
Well, exactly, and I think that is just the ongoing. I think we've learnt a lot. We've certainly learnt a lot along the years, and I kind of have a good sense of what good looks like now. And the amount of times getting involved with unpicking architectural problems that have been made sort of 5 years ago, and often the case is you just need to rip it all out, and it's a real shame when money's been thrown at this problem. And I think if you step back a little bit, and some of that's driven by buzzwordy trends that are out there, and I think this is where something like, again, coming back to the Drupal point, I know we're talking beyond the scope of just Drupal on its own, but like some of the concepts there have turned out to be remarkably robust. The modularity of that and extensibility, the consistency, the repeatability, these are things that are good for businesses. And they're
Yeah.
and also the fact that you're not locked into proprietary solutions that can just go away on a whim. That
Mm.
you are There's a robustness there and a community that can support that. So I think this is we're coming back to the open point as well. It's something that I've certainly always been a
Yeah.
huge fan of, and I see the difference that makes when it comes to solving these problems, large scale problems over time, where you really do need that foundational layer that we're describing here. Um, and increasingly, as you then extend that, as I was sort of hinting on, when you're managing a bunch of AI agents that facilitate the process of configuring these applications, and creating versions of themselves to some extent, or derivative capability.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, the problem is getting somewhat more complicated, but with these principles in place, it's not insurmountable, and an approach to this, a playbook. Dare I say it, if I use one
Yeah.
American expression, a playbook.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And without revealing to all and sundry, your prized experience and competitive advantage. May I say, what does that playbook look like? What are the kind of building blocks of that playbook? How would you break it down?
well, I think it's a combination of what we've kind of gone through today. I think there's the ability to the components of scale and governance, which is including the IT considerations and the design elements as well. I think that really that idea of bridging the gap between IT considerations and marketing into this new experience area. I think, without repeating some of what was said, that is so
Yeah.
key to this. But then by understanding the requirements of that particular persona, and it's not one person, it's a group of people. Like I was saying, it can be
Yeah.
more design
Yeah.
orientated developers, marketing technologists, which is a persona in its own right. What do they need to be able to be successful? Because they're the people that are ultimately pulling this stuff together, and they're utilizing platforms like Acquia to be able to do that. And then they have goals that the business needs to deliver on in terms of engagement and conversion, regardless of your type of
Yeah.
organization that you are. Um, yeah, and that toolbox of capabilities has got bigger and bigger. But I think that's where I would say the kind of well, my perspective on that, I'd like to sort of look at that through the lens of that quality content as well. That's still an idea I'm expanding upon, but I think what I'm trying to reach for is, what do you need? What's the basics of this? I don't necessarily want to call it DXP, because that can mean a million
Mm.
things. And I want to say
Yeah.
that content, I need to get it to the right people at the right time on the right channel, and I want to spend as little money as possible to do that. And I might want to do that for 50 brands or one brand. And I think that as an organizing idea, it certainly keeps me focused on what's important. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you touched on something. There's something I'd like to go back to. You just mentioned there, which we've both seen, and it's I have such huge empathy for the clients we talk with who have to make this decision. But we see so many, I guess, digital transformation programs kind of stalled or not gaining momentum, not kind of achieving their full potential. And that's often when we start talking with people, isn't it? At that stage, it's like, how do we get this thing working? We know what we want to achieve, and I think you've just so clearly um, broken that down, getting the right content to the right people on the right channel at the right time. Such a simple aim, but it seems in some circumstances really hard to achieve. And we end up in the situation where we're looking at what's currently in place, how it's organized, and you said it might have a 5-year legacy on some of those architectures. And then we have to address that problem. Look, we might have to rip this out. We might have to completely replace that, and that's you can sometimes hear the audible intake of breath when people
The
almost know that you're
Freddy
going to
Krueger bit, right?
say,
It's like it comes with a Freddy Krueger
yeah,
knife
that's
glove.
right. That's right. That's right. And depending on who's in the room, you can hear several different people, sharply breathing for different reasons as well. So, how do we help people in that situation? And I guess what advice and what strategies do you see our clients kind of adopting to be successful when they have to address that? They've got to a point where what they currently have in place just isn't working. They know they're going to have to make a change. How do we help them to be successful in that decision making? And what kind of strategies do they adopt which help them through that process?
Well, you've asked some really big questions today, and I'm glad my caffeine is finally clicking in. But I think partly that's a tough one to answer because it's going to be different for everybody. But I do think also having a clear goal as well, because when you're especially working with larger organisation or even mid-size, there's different priorities. So I think you know I'm constantly reminded of this to have a unified vision of what good looks like. I know what I think good looks like, and but like it's not what I think necessarily. It's our customers have their own ideas about what's important to them. I think I've tried to
Yeah,
articulate, which is what I think is quite a generic goal, but there's plenty of variation in there and priorities. I think where big change is required, I think where technology has helped and innovation recently is ability to migrate existing experiences pretty much completely automated and AI using AI to suck an experience from one platform, if I could put it on another. That's evolved incredibly
yeah,
fast in the last couple of years.
yeah,
And that's down to
yeah.
AI. So straight away, what would have been maybe a couple hundred K to move something across. And that's where no one's planned for that. And that's where you're going to get you go to your car garage and they go, you need to change your catalytic converter. And what's a catalytic? You're getting charged for something. You're like, no one wants to pay for that. But the idea you can move something that's dying on a particular platform, which has a lot, the experience itself might not actually be that bad, suck it into another platform. And then with the type of tools that we've discussed in this session, where you can then close that gap between IT and marketing, for example, would be a good start point. I wouldn't say there's one size fits all here, but I think that helps reduce the change management aspect of things, or actually the cost of migration more accurately. Change management still, because you still have to bring people up to speed. And actually, just without going down a rabbit hole too much here, but the other thing that I think maybe I'd like to get your opinion on this as well, is people are overwhelmed with the suite of tools that they've got here. And
Yeah.
I think another sort of, and I think there's a lot of legacy there as well, where you may have, say, as a marketing person, you may have access to 6 or 7 tools, and you're not, but then different people in your team will use those, and there's kind of there's not there's maybe too much overlap between those tools, so you're spending more money than you probably need. Where maybe 4 tools could do that, but then that comes down to not so much a technology problem, but more accurately a people, process, and technology problem.
I
Where,
think it's absolutely that. I think, yeah, I think I'm really glad you've raised that. I think that's a huge driver in the decision making process. It's how you take a team with you on that journey.
yeah, I mean that's it. It's like often it's the case, like people are trying. I just want to get this content out there, my campaign out there, and my budget is reduced this year by 10%. So I need my business is still has the same objectives it has, but I've got 10% less now. So from a marketing team, if say you're a CMO, to keep the CFO happy with less budget, like that is your mission. Like, and the following year it'll probably be the same compounded reduction in your budget because that's the way things are going. So doing more with less, but trying to address it purely as an architectural thing is not is only a component of this problem. A lot of it, as you well know, on the agency side, is what you're trying to achieve, like at the persona level. Let's look at the basics and let's look at the handoffs between that as well. I've got this concept around digital experience optimization where you'd literally shown from the concept of creating an idea of content you want to get out there through to everything a platform can do to get that content on that right channel and at the right time. Or that's the goal, right? But what are the handoffs between people? Do I need 7 products? No, I probably need 3 or 4. But what is it? And lay that out because then if you're really serious about, say, ROI, which you should be, of course, and most if you ask a C level like a CMO, they're going to say, yeah, that's it. Ultimately for their investment. But how do you get to that? So we have to look at those things at that detail, put a lens on those things. Uh, and that's the kind of conversation I'm trying to have where we get the opportunity to do those things. Is because I think that's how you solve the problem because you need less things, you need better collaboration between people, and you can make significant cost savings by addressing that people, process, and technology problem. Um, I think
Yeah.
it's challenging for people though. I get that. I'm not going to try and underestimate the efforts. When you've got people who've worked in
Yeah.
a certain way for 10 years, these aren't easy, and then they're expected to use productivity tools with AI. It's overwhelming for a lot of people. But the march of change is there. So how can we sort of soften that
Yeah.
for people? But
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's here whether we like it or not, isn't it? It's and it's an increasing part of our world, and it's driving huge benefits. So we have to use use the best of it where it makes sense. I think. I mean, you touched there on the people side. So there's the technology, there's the people, there's the process. We've talked about the technology, we've talked a bit about the process. People is interesting though. So when when you see very successful digital transformation programs that address this kind of multi-site, multi-market challenge. How are those teams set up? How are they configured? How are they motivated? What's their ethos? Can you see any kind of have you observed any kind of consistent themes in the very successful kind of client teams that you've worked with over the years?
I think the pattern would be that they've understood this experience persona more, this group of people, and they've moved
Yeah,
away from, well, obviously there's going to be IT and IT leadership and marketing, which I don't think have changed. I think the goals are the same as they were 15 years ago, 20 years ago, that we described earlier on. But I think the people who
yeah,
are making those strides forward have understood that middle ground because really it comes back to the earlier point that we covered, which was your ability to the smaller the gap is between that, and that's really to do with things like time to value and ability to connect those two teams together, whether it's like multi-brand or not. There's some commonalities there, I think. But just to
yeah,
answer the question very specifically, I think it's an awareness that middle space has changed. It's not IT, it's not marketing, it's its own thing. Um, uh, Particularly with sort of larger or older organizations, they're very set in quite traditional approaches, and you understand why. There's a lot of turning the large ship, over time. It's going to take time. But that said,
yeah,
we've seen examples of large organizations doing exactly that, and that really answers the point, the question you're asking, which is it can be done, has been done. Um, and maybe getting that message out there, and back to that idea: is there a playbook for this? Probably. There are some
yeah.
there's some good learnings that have come out of those type of projects that would apply to pretty much anybody who's operating at that kind of scale.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like we consistently see, in successful organizations, they build really strong centers of excellence that
Yeah,
are uniquely focused on that customer experience, user experience persona, and they organize around that. and they organize around that in terms of all the different facets that you might need: a technology facet, a data analytics facet, a user experience facet, accessibility. They create these really kind of effective multidisciplinary teams that are really focused on blending in and supporting with the technology and the aspect. And then they create really strong partnerships with organizations like yourself and organizations like ours. Those kind of like strategic rosters, and they that kind of combination of really focusing, almost like creating that one team approach, seems to be a consistent message for me in terms of
Yeah.
the programs that have really worked really well. So I'd like to just like move on now. We've been chatting. We had like a quite a wide ranging chat, and I've really thrown some big questions at you today. So without any apologies, I'm going to throw one more like massive question. I'm just going to say, like, what is the CMS of the future, Alan? How would you describe it? Break that down for us.
Well, I think that's where um, I think the idea of the CMS is really the heart. Out of all the changes that have happened around, the one consistent, I think, is the content, right? Is the heart of all. Some people talk
Yeah.
about is the king of content is king, or all these kind of old sort of cliches, but it is true. And the CMS evolution or CMS plus, whatever it is, has the capabilities built into it that will ensure that the quality of what you're producing initially, like the costs from a content campaign starts before you've opened up any piece of technology. You have an idea in there. You want to better validate that idea in the context of, first and foremost, how are your potential customers out there thinking about the problem that you think you've got a solution for? So firstly, you need to be able to attach to that, and that's not necessarily as quite as simple as perhaps it might have been in the past, because of the way that people are searching for content, and they're researching things is happening. I'd say maybe up to a third of that's happening within some kind of AI companion tool. Well, I'm not going to specify any particular one, but you know what I mean. And there's,
Yeah.
but there's and then but he's still going to deal with, ultimately, what's not going to go away is, actually, let's go into that a little bit more. If you look at bit of a tangent here, potentially, but the deep seek controversy over the last couple of
Yes.
weeks, like, I think
Yeah.
what made that potentially dangerous for its competitors, US competitors, was it had actually a very clear concept behind it, which was like, rather than trying to build a kind of conversational AI, what it did was basically give you Search Plus, which was AI search, because what it did, it used
Yeah.
traditional aspects of SEO rankings, and a way that quality in results is validated, has been forever, and then it's summarized based on that. And it's like, that's such an obvious step, right? And I know Google have played around
Yeah.
with this, but to some levels of success. But what it does, though, is firstly, it reinforces the source of that content and your ability to put that content out there, because it's kind of it reinforces that, and it also reinforces the idea of trust in that as well, because I think that's the other thing that AI can't do. It can't do trust, and it can't do quality, I would argue. They're things that are in our area that we need to do. So, and for us to be successful with our experiences and building content that resonates with a core problem or a requirement from our customers, we have to contend with quality and trust. So the CMS Plus, that should be the capability, and I would say more than that, and enable the processes for the around people to deliver that. That's what, and you can put a label on that. That was, I think that's really what the CMS of the future is. It's it goes back to what I was saying. It's getting the right content to people on the right channel. I sound like a politician here, repeating
Yeah.
sort of like policy, but I
Yeah. No, no, I know. Yeah, I know what you mean.
yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like kind of content. What's the word? Content guardianship. Is that right?
I think it's quality. I think it's about
It's
quality.
almost,
Yeah, it's just like,
yeah,
and quality means a lot. Like, quality is quality, right? But you need to get the more, the less quality you've got. These ideas that you can quickly create content through a Gen AI, which you can, But without that being, cross-referenced with SEO context and how people are finding things,
Yeah.
like SEO, the challenge there is how do you know what people are searching for? It can't just be keyword relevancy anymore. That's part of it, of course. It has to be how people are articulating that within the AI itself, and that and there are actually there's some evolution happening and innovation happening in that space, which we probably shouldn't get into here, but that's part of it to drive that quality thing. Because as soon as the cab meter is running, I'm creating some content. I want that content to get to this audience. The platform should help you do that at each step, and it should also have right at the end of that. There needs to be a nice big dashboard that says this worked for this reason, not like a load of data that you have to try and work out
Yeah.
this. It should say you spent
Yeah.
10 grand on this campaign and it's created this much of this, or whatever your conversion is.
Yeah.
That simplicity and transparency, if you can do that, I think that's what most people want, regardless of your type of organization. It's
Mm.
am I getting the most out of my marketing budget, like, to do that, and have I got transparency around that? um, I think that's still the goal, like, of this stuff, and I think that's the future of the CMS, or CMS plus, if you like.
There we go. You heard it here. CMS Plus. It's that's what's coming. Um, and Alan, I can't thank you enough. I've really thrown some stuff at you today, and I think you've responded with great good humour and gusto. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you here on Digital Transformation Survivors.
Cheers, Julian. Thanks for having me.